All right, everyone. Well, it is 5 p.m. and I just want to welcome you all today. We'll get started here. So if everybody can just go ahead and mute, we will get started here. I'm just looking for my intro real quick. I have to have my intro so that I don't get my words mixed up. All right, everyone. Well, hamataku yapi yushki angwen chian kapi chante washte nape chiu zapi he. Hello, my relatives. It is so good to see you all. I greet you all with a warm heart and a handshake. Happy Earth Day, everyone, and welcome to Sacred Medicines and Garden Beginnings, honoring Mother Earth. My name is Kateri Tuttle. I was born and raised in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I am Santee in Sisseton, Wahpeton, Dakota. The Twin Cities, or Minneapolis and St. Paul, are the traditional homelands to the Dakota people. At this time, I invite you all to let us know who you are, where you are joining from, and acknowledging the traditional homelands of the Indigenous peoples from where you are, if you know. And I will also say, thank you to all the people that have already let us know where you're coming from. We have a lot of our Canadian relatives coming and hanging out with us today. I'm really excited for everyone to be here. But yeah, a lot of First Nations and a lot of our Canadian Native people relatives. So that's awesome. As we keep those acknowledgements coming in, I'd like to take a second to review some audience participation guidelines. If at any point you can't hear one of the presenters or need something clarified, please let us know in the chat. Also, please feel free to leave comments and your thoughts throughout the panelists' presentations in the chat. And then at the end of each presentation, we have a Q&A. So please hold all direct questions for the panelists until that time. Our garden presentations, Jessica and Ashley will be together, and then we will be doing their Q&A at the end of both of their presentations as well. Last thing to note is that we are recording this presentation, and we will make this recording available through Dream of Wild Health social media venues soon. Make sure to keep yourselves muted throughout the presentation as well. We will also be posting a survey in the chat. Please feel free to go ahead and please fill that out. Tyra, our association, our communications, Tyra will be helping us kind of do that. She will be posting the survey in the chat. And so I will let you know whenever we can fill that out. I'm sorry. I am the program coordinator for the Indigenous Food Network and have been with Dream of Wild Health since 2019. The Indigenous Food Network aims to increase access to healthy Indigenous foods and increase consumption of healthy Indigenous foods. It also provides an opportunity for Native-led organizations in the Twin Cities to work together to rebuild a sovereign food system by identifying and leveraging community assets. Healthy Indigenous foods and lifeways, collaboration, and community are at the heart of what we do in the IFN. Padamayaye, or thanks to all of our partners for all the work you do and for your continued participation and support of the IFN. If anybody would like more information about the Indigenous Food Network, please feel free to message me, Kateri, at dreamofwildhealth.org, or you could also go to our Dream of Wild Health site page and find more information under the Indigenous Food Network's program page. The Indigenous Food Network is housed within Dream of Wild Health. Dream of Wild Health is a nonprofit organization with an office in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and a 30-acre organic farm in Hugo, Minnesota, which is about 35 to 40 minutes north of Minneapolis. Surrounded by plants and medicines grown from the seeds of our ancestors, we work to empower Native American people to reclaim their physical, spiritual, and mental health. At Dream of Wild Health, we grow seeds and we grow leaders. If anybody has any questions about Dream of Wild Health youth programming, open positions, or anything else, please feel free to message us at info@dreamofwildhealth.org. At this time, I would like to introduce our first presenter. Her name is Hope Flanagan, or Nudinesikwe, which means Little Wind Woman in Ojibwe. She is the community outreach and cultural teacher at Dream of Wild Health, and she is Seneca from Tonawanda Reservation in Western New York. Among many of the things that she does for Dream of Wild Health and our community, she teaches Native young people about plants and their gifts. She has a teacher certification from the University of Minnesota in Social Studies and American Indian Eminence credentials. She also has teacher certification in English as a second language, early childhood education, and in elementary education. She has always heard that each plant has its own gift to the people, food, medicine, or utility. They know their purpose, and people have to learn and listen. I have so much respect for Hope, and without further ado, here is Hope Flanagan, and thank you for joining us again.
Oh, bonjour, ning dinawe magani dok nichipe madasik. Hello, all my relatives, my fellow living beings. Nu dinensikwe indigo. I'm known to the spirits as Little Wind Woman. Oh, bonjour, ginawa. Mikanak Nindudame. I'm a snapping turtle, but I'm appearing right now in my human form. So my clan is Snapping Turtle. Dream of Wild Health in Danoki. I work over there at Dream Wild Health. I'm coming into my 13th summer of working over there. But I have to say this knowledge of, or this journey of learning about plants is a lifelong learning experience. So for me, and I'm sure many of you have memories of being little bitty ones and having elders come out with us, or a mom or grandma or uncle or grandpa, and sort of you start to notice those plants and how they're relatives, you know, right off the bat. Those are relatives right there. We're so fortunate to have them with us and be able to walk this road with us. I always want to start thinking about like the spirit of the plant, because each one of those plants are just as alive as we are. So when you're thinking about honoring those plants or accepting their gift, and the gift might be food, it might be medicine, it might be you can make something out of it, but you also want to think about every green plant is giving us breath. So there's so much, they're so generous. One of the Adazukana that I get to tell in the wintertime, that's the legends that was passed on to me. One of those legends talks about that we're the babies, we're the youngest ones here, and we're the ones that are most likely to forget our original instructions. So Mother Earth, she's not going to forget why she's here. And those plants, they've been here a long, long time. They're not going to forget how to act on this earth. And the animals, they came next, but we're the last ones here. So we're the ones that are most likely to be crabby babies and get all egotistical and forget about how to live in balance. So one of the things that I remember being really young and noticing plants, and my mom would point out plants, and remember trying to learn about what is that plant, you know, and she'd tell me, and I'd remember seeing people out picking. And a lot of times when you'd see groups of people out picking, it'd be Native people, and people might be out picking hazelnuts or June berries or blackberries. It was a beautiful thing to see. You know, people would go out there for their families as a family activity. And the way I was taught, you know, when I think about this, is that we're receiving that gift. So we have to give a gift before we take. So that teaching goes to different communities in different ways. So around in this neck of the woods on Turtle Island, you'll hear most people talk about you pagadana sema apene akawe asema. So that means always first tobacco. Gemago giwi bacha aga al misko beamish gemago gete asema. So maybe you're going to use your red willow tobacco. Maybe you're going to use your tobacco that was raised from father to son, father to son. We know that the tribes had those tobaccos for a minimum of 9,000 years. So we know that that was the offering, the gift. Some people use pollen in some of our tribes. Some people use food as the offering. But the reminder is it has to be something meaningful. So the work that you do, the work that you put out there, that shows that you mean that. Like, so if you make your own red willow tobacco, you're demonstrating that you really want to spend your heart, your time, your love to show that you mean it, that you're thankful for those plants and what the gifts that they give. So before you go out picking, think about that. Always remember, especially with wild plants, there's a community. They're talking underground all the time. So if you're looking at wild plants, this one wants to grow next to its friends, its relatives, its support system. That's just like us, right? So they get to grow where they choose to grow if they're wild plants. So they're going to probably have more nutritional value because they're growing as wild beings. The way you would say it in the language is Awasiag, the wild ones, and the Awakanag, the domesticated ones. Well, the wild ones, they get to choose where they grow, and they're growing next to a whole diverse community. So there's all this stuff going on underground. So that they're more likely to taste differently. So some of like when you eat a wild strawberry, wham, that flavor and that nutritional level is way high. When you eat a domesticated strawberry, it might not be, especially if the people who raised that strawberry didn't think of that as a living being, because that living being is just like us. It needs clean water, clean air, rich and tended soil. It needs food. So if it doesn't have the nutritional basis, it can't give us its gift. So we know now, if you eat something that looks like a strawberry, it might be really big, but it might just have a fraction of the nutritional level in there because now somebody used pesticides, somebody used poisons or herbicides, and maybe somebody put genetically modified materials on the root system and sprayed the strawberry. And so a lot of that to be true, to be mindful about what you eat. We want to be mindful that plant and that spirit was protected and recognized and can give its gift. So now let's get to some of the really fun stuff. To me, plants are so wonderful. I know when I was little and it was scary to be in the house and sometimes bad things were happening in the house, I knew that those plants weren't like that. You could go outside and you could feel it. You could learn from them, and they were dependable and they were full of gifts. So remember that. Think about plants that way. Practice that, getting in tune when you walk in the woods. Spend some time noticing plants. And maybe you start out with one. Maybe you start out with one that really speaks to you. Spend time with it. I know after a while, you start to actually hear them if you really recognize them, just like us. They're just like us, those quadrants. We've got to recognize our spirit, our mind, our emotions, and our physical being. They have that same kind of connection. They have to have that level of health as well. So as I'm thinking about that, I know that in our way, this right now is our new year. So as I think about it, the way I was taught, and it'll be different, ask your family, maybe your tribal ways are different, but in the way I was taught, I look to the east, and that's where that doorway is. That's when this year started, in the springtime. So right now, here all these babies are coming. And right now, those little babies are those, what they call spring ephemerals. They're only here for a little while, but boy, they're just full of food and medicine and full of life. And right now, if you get to go out in the woods, you'll see all sorts of kinds of plants that are only here for a short time, because then the leaves come and they can't get sunlight. So you only see them for a very short period of time. So I want to talk about some of them. I also want to show you that as you learn about some plants, you say, oh, this is food and this is medicine. Sometimes that really is a differentiation. So maybe you're starting to learn, oh, gee, I know I went to like the the history center where they had a gift shop and they had some medicine, like here's some right here that was infused into honey. So here's one way to get that medicine into your system. Or maybe here's one right here that was put into a tea. So we're always thinking about how do you get the spirit of the plant, the biology of the plant into your body. You can eat it, you can make it as a tea, you could infuse it into honey, you could use a tincture. This one's Pejuta, Mato Pejuta. I don't make tinctures. I was always taught from old ladies. And so I only know how to do the old ways, but it's fun to see it and to learn from them, to see how did different people get the medicines into their body. So I want to start today by looking at some of the plants that are ready right now and the different ones for different seasons. I'll start off with this. Most of you know this one. This is ready right now. It was up really early. This is the ramps, or the some people in Ojibwe you'd say Bagwaji Chicago Wanjin. So that just means the wild skunk Chicago Wanjin, the wild skunk plant. You can eat the whole thing. But here's the problem, is people like to over harvest this one because our bodies are really used to, oh gee, it tastes like a mild sweet onion and it's only ready for a short time. So make sure you count 10 and pick one. We don't ever want to over harvest. We want to respect them, you know, that they can continue to promote themselves. So the spring onions, the wild ramps, always make sure you don't over harvest. Here's one that people were asking for this week. Those of you who are doulas, this is one that really gets thrown out as a weed. They'll say, oh, I don't want it in my garden. But for doulas, for those of you who are young mothers, this is the one they call motherwort. It's a mild medicine, but it's for people who just had babies, and you drink it to tighten up your insides, and you use it as a wash on the outside. So I know just this past week, I was talking to a group at a university and they said, well, how do you take it? Because, gee, it's so bitter, it's going to turn your stomach. I said, well, I know from when I was talking to some friends up at Leech Lake when I was young, they bathed in it and the medicine was absorbed through the skin. It was in a horse trough. So back in those days, you get the medicine into you however it needs to get in. So another way might be the smoke treatment, where you burn it and inhale it. Sometimes nowadays people will say, well, how come you're always talking about tobacco? Well, sometimes when I say tobacco, I don't mean Nicotiana tabacum. I might be talking about Nicotiana rustica that was raised by the different tribes and ends up being very different from tribe to tribe. Or it might be an herbal mix that's getting medicine into the body through inhaling it. So that's just another way to get the medicine into the body. A good example is this one. And one of the Ojibwe names for it is Okundamu. If you look at it, it looks just like the juncture of the trachea and the lungs. And it's letting you know that's what it's for. Now, one of the reasons why I like to bring up this plant is it shows how our people work together, because this plant was brought from Dakota land right here down. It grows naturally south of here, but it was brought up to Bear Island in Minnesota by the Ojibwe folks, and it was grown next to that Bear Island corn. So that plant was brought because it was known to be a good medicine. The cup plant is the English name of it. It makes a little cup, and there's water that insects can go to or birds can go to. It's got a really square stem and a flower that looks like a sunflower. So here's one that I picked yesterday. You couldn't think of it. You would think, oh my gosh, look, it's all dried out. This is shepherd's purse. And some of you might notice it's one that's really spicy. So you can use that. You can use the little triangles. They were called the purses. They have mustard seeds in there. It's in the mustard family. So if you were going to make a wild salad and maybe you use oh gee, you could use lamb's quarters, and you could put a little bit of curly dock in there to get it some mucilaginous, but you put a little bitterness in there, and maybe you put in cut leaf toothwort to put some horseradish flavor in there. Oh my gosh, you could make a really nice, or maybe some violets to kick up the vitamin A and vitamin C. The violets are blooming right now too, so you want to pick the leaves. So there's a lot of things you can go and make a beautiful, beautiful, full of vitamins from the woods. Make sure you put down your offering and make sure to count before you pick. So I'm going to ask if we could take a look now at some of the pictures, some of the photos. Tyra. Well, before we go, I do want to talk about too. Here's a good example. This is chaga. A lot of you have heard of chaga. It's a really strong medicine, but it can be over harvested too. So it's found growing on the birch trees. Now, this is one you would pick in the winter time. The reason why is it is a fungus. I mean, it's the tree is trying to fight off a sickness, an injury actually. So you have to find an injured birch tree that is sending its healing power to heal itself. And the chemistry that it uses, called betulin, gets trapped by the fungus, and it's in there being held with water. So what happens if you pick it in the wintertime, then it's not going to have mold and mildew growing on it. So you can dry it real easy. I just put it somewhere that's dry, that it can just hold all dry and dark. That's what I do. Just let it dry out. So like I dry it out through the winter time and then grind it out, and I've got it all summer, and I'm always working on next year's batch. But again, there's so many gifts. We don't have to just concentrate on one thing, because this is one that's popular. It's kind of like a fad, I guess, but it works. So I just wanted to lift that up. Tyra, if you want to start the slides, we'll take a look at some of the ones that are available right now. And I did try to show from different parts of Minnesota, because, oh my gosh, you could just pick one little spot and easily find, oh gee. Yesterday I was down by Cannon River, and oh gee, it was just full of food. It was just all kinds of different kinds of food. So we're very, very fortunate. This first slide is what I was talking about when I said, chaga will grow both on the yellow birch, and you see that yellow birch, and on the white birch. Now, what happened here in Minnesota is when the land was taken, the trees were taken. And at one time there was no food. There was, couldn't find moose, couldn't find much of anything, because the trees were taken, and where are the animals? So the paper birch, the white birch, has been so kind and generous to us. You could live off of the white birch, the inner bark. It's bitter as all get out, but that's why you might hear people, they used to call Ojibwe folks rabbit chokers, because all the other game was gone once all the trees got taken. Now, if you wanted to make winter green tea, a whole different other medicine, go to that yellow birch. So in the spring, you can tap both the white birch and the yellow birch. They have a wonderful sap. I mean, it'd be really something if anybody wanted to get into that, because they make a syrup just like the maple does, but you do it at the same time that the maple is running. So you see that yellow birch? They know now, they're saying, at least the DNR is saying, that the yellow birch is going to be able to stick around despite climate change. The white birch, probably not. If you want to make sure you've got yellow birch, take your thumbnail and scrape it along a twig, and then take a sniff. If it smells like wintergreen, that's yellow birch. So it likes to grow next to white pine trees. So if you've got a bunch of white pine trees, you might see one that looks like it's a dirty yellow. That's a yellow birch. Of course, the paper birch, that's how you make your Nuskatchinagan, your trays, your canoe, your dishes, your home. Oh my gosh, it has so many gifts. Okay, let's see the next one. So that would be an early spring. Here we've got the two nettles, and nettles are kind of popular now too. On the one side where it looks a little softer, that's the one they call the woodland nettle. And that's the one where Net Lake Reservation gets the name NETT from that nettles, because oh my gosh, it makes super good fishing nets if you use the twine. The other one is called stinging nettles, where it's got the jaggedy points on the edges. They're both good for, for nutrition, but they also, you can make your fishing nets out of them. So I remember Ignatia Broker, long time ago, she showed me about getting those twigs in the late fall. So November is the time you want to get the little stems of both the woodland nettles or the stinging nettles to make your fiber work. So they're real high in nutrition. They love to grow. The woodland nettles loves to grow along rivers. So if you've got any rivers, check out. So sometimes you'll see literal just blocks and blocks worth of the woodland nettles. That's of the two, that's the easier one to eat. You of course can dry it and make a tea. So for example, that tea I picked up and I said, this is a Lakota medicine called Lakota Tezi tea. It's nettles, chamomile, and ginger root, and it's for digestion. So it's a combination tea. Let's look at the next one. It's true. I know Sean Sherman's talking about making a tea section for his new restaurant. This one right here is called burdock. Gawisagung is how you say it in Ojibwe. It was brought here. It's not a native plant, but there's so much you can do with it. The leaves, the big leaves come out, look like rhubarb leaves. We used to wrap meat in there. And then if you baked that meat, if you put it in made an underground oven, like people used to do, that way it would keep the meat from losing all the fat and flavor. And that word gawisagung is talking about how it's going to give it a peppery feeling or flavor. Now look at the root. This weekend I went to ceremony, and that's exactly what I did. I dug up the burdock root and I mixed it with deer meat and cooked it up. So right now is the time to get it. It tastes like a carrot. Now, like a woodsy carrot. It has a little bit more flavor than carrot. Now, if you wanted to use it as a medicine, now you dry it out, you sliver it, put it on a cookie sheet, dry it out and grind it and use it as a tea, as a liver cleanse. Around here, one of the things I get requests for, and like I said, my job isn't to be a medicine woman or anything like that. No, I just fetch medicine. So if people say, Hope, would you get me some burdock root and some dandelion root? Remember your tobacco. If you go to an elder, gift them tobacco. They got to have tobacco in their hot little hand. So if you blend the dandelion root and the burdock root, grind it up, drink a cup in the morning and a cup at night for a month. And it's really good for people trying to quit drinking, quit drugs, to clean off their system, to clean off their livers. Okay, let's go to the next one. Here, I get a lot of requests for this one too. This is the ostrich fern, Waganogun, which just means it is bent over. So you say, hey, isn't that how we talk about our lodges? Those dome-shaped lodges, they're talking about it is bent over. And you can see it right there on the fiddleheads. So the fiddlehead ferns, they're going to start coming up. Now, I kind of think that doesn't look like an ostrich fern. The ostrich ones are shining when they bend up and they're first coming up from the ground. So don't take all of them. Take 1, 2 max so that the plant can be strong and healthy. So if you find a good spot where there's lots of these ostrich ferns, just pick a few of those fiddleheads and then go on to the next clump, because that's one tree, or I'm sorry, that's one plant right there. So you don't want to take all of its leaves or it's going to die. It transplants pretty easy too. If you find a good patch and you've got some wet areas near a yard or near your home, or even on the edges of your home where the gutters drain off water, that's a good place to have that. You can eat them only in the springtime. They're not up yet. Some of them, like if I go north, you can follow these with the season. So I remember last 4th of July, 2 years ago, I was up by the Canadian border picking them. And down here, it was the end of May, down in the Twin Cities area. Okay, next one. Here's one that's ready right now. This one's called, in Ojibwe, we call it Manishtana Panig, which means little sheep potatoes. And that's kind of what the potatoes look like. They look like little white or yellow sheep. The yellow one was, like when sheep get kind of dirty. That's what they look like from last year's potato. And then this year's potato is going to be white. And just at the Sugar Bush ceremony this weekend, where we were thanking the trees, these were really ready. So you can get those and you eat them. They taste like the texture is like a horse chestnut, and then or not horse chestnut, a water chestnut, and then it tastes like horseradish. So it's nice and spicy, and you can eat the top part. Now here's what I'm going to ask though. If you see this plant flowering, it's trying to make seeds. So just eat the leaf ones, and you can eat the leaves. You can put that in a salad, and then you can collect the potatoes. So if you're collecting the potatoes, they're not huge. I mean, they're bigger than a raisin. I mean, if you want to dry them, all I do is I put them on a paper plate or put them on a cookie sheet and just let them air dry. And then they're good for a long, long time, just like wild rice. Once it's ready, you can just leave it be. People used to put them in sacks, and then you could have them all winter long. Just reconstitute them by putting them in water and boiling them up. Okay. Cut leaf toothwort, I'm sorry, is the English name of that one. The English name of this one is Spring Beauties. And this is one I've really enjoyed, where we get a bunch of us women together, because, back in the day, the women were in charge of did most of the plant work, and the men did the meat work, so it's not always that way, but it is fun if you get a bunch of people together and you go picking this, the Spring Beauties right here. Now you can eat, the Ojibwe name for it talks about the beautiful woman potato. So if you look at the green part, you can eat that. You can eat the flowers, and then underneath you're going to find a little corm, and it's bigger than a lentil, about like that. And you can rub off the outside skin, and it tastes like, and then you boil it. It tastes like a boiled almond. They're actually delicious. If you ever hear of British Columbia, they've got the Potato Mountains. And some people say the Potato Mountains are named after this plant because it's, like I said, beautiful woman potato is the translation of the name of this one. You get a little potato. And so people would get that, like right now is when you get it. You pick it now, and then you're going to dry it out, and you could have it all winter long. Let's go to the next one.
Oh, just a quick time check. It's about 5:33. So if you have a few more that you wanted to present for sure, then we can go ahead and let you present for about another 8 minutes, and then we'll do about 10 minutes.
Sure. I'll just try to hurry through these. This one's called Sweet Sicily. It's ready right now. It tastes like licorice. The roots are good too. It's good for settling your stomach. If you go to a fresh woods right now, there's a hairy kind and a smooth kind, and you can just eat them as they are. Let's go to the next one. Okay, here's one for way up north. For you guys that live way up in Canada, I know like one of my elders that I learned from is from up by Moose Factory, where the land runs out. And she always talked about this one. And it's a little deceiving because you see that heart-shaped leaf? That was the part that she said, oh yeah, when I was little, we would always love to go pick this. So in the Boundary Waters, we have it all over in the Boundary Waters. You pick it when it first comes out of the ground, and it's gonna look like a little heart. And it has a nice little spicy flavor, but it's gonna get bitter. So I wanted to include it to show in different parts of Minnesota, there's different plants. You're not gonna find this plant around the Twin Cities, and you're certainly not going to find it south of the Twin Cities. But if you start heading north, that's a good green. And she said, oh yeah, we used to always make soup out of that one. Okay, let's go to the next one. Here's a nice one. And those of you who live north, like from northern Minnesota and north, this one's called Sweet Gale. And these little nutlets are, it's in the bay family. So if ever you like cooking with bay leaves, this is related to that. Those little nutlets are the part I like the best. because they're really spicy. And this tree is a real powerful nitrogen fixer. The Ojibwe name for this talks about the sound of the waves, because it grows where the waves are coming in, and it's starting to create soil on those rocky islands. You know how there's no soil up there? Like you start to get into northern Ontario and there's no soil. This plant helps to create the soil. So the nutlets are going to give you that bay flavor. So it's a really good meat rub if you're looking for sharp, spicy flavors. People would put that, like if you wanted to use venison, oh my gosh, that'd be perfect. It makes a real nice tea, but it's going to stain your hands black and it's going to stain your insides black. So if you cook it, if you use it as a tea, watch out for your cupboards, because whatever it sits on, it's going to stain black. Let's go to the next one. Oh, here goes hog peanuts. So this is a wild bean. Here in the Minneapolis area, we've got 3 different kinds of wild beans, and you can see where she's got them in her hands. This one is the smallest of the wild beans, and then there's one that's actually called wild bean, and then the last one is the one we called Indian potatoes, or opinis, which is just, if you speak the language, opin means potato. So it looks like brown potatoes on a string. So it grows on a string. And that's our old Indian potatoes, wild potatoes that we use for thousands of years. So it's a wonderful food source that they use as a domesticated food source in Japan and some of the Asian countries. I don't know why we don't use it here. It's all around, and it's liking the weather change. It's liking the heat and the humidity. Let's go to the next one. Oh, here goes the cup plant. And the reason I really wanted to include this one is because, I spoke about it earlier, as it gives that gift of the smoke treatment to loosen up your chest. You can make a poultice out of it, use it as a tea. But I wanted to mention that, sometimes people like to talk about our tribes not getting along, but our medicines were shared. And if you're going to work with medicines, please remember to work with the spirit of the plant. I always want to remind people that in the old days, people were just as intent on working with the spirit of the plant as the biology of the plant. So just here's an example. There's a plant that a friend of mine really needed. She asked me to go get it, and it could heal a broken bone in 4 days. The biology of the plant can't do that, but the spirit of the plant can. So I showed her the plant. Now I've seen it 3 times now. I've seen it work. So I showed her the plant. We made the tea. We made the poultice. It healed her daughter's broken leg in 4 days. But then she had to gift blankets, silver, tobacco. You really want to honor those spirits. So here's a point I want to make. I went to ceremony this last Sunday, and the guy who was presenting said, oh, gee, this fellow I know was going to run a shake tent, but nobody offered him tobacco. So we don't offer our tobacco to the plants. We don't offer our tobacco to the medicine people. They can't give their gift. Remember, these are spirits that we're dealing with. We have to honor that spiritual side of ourselves, or we can't get the healing. So remember to try to live in balance with your mind, your physical body, your spirit, and your heart. If you don't live in balance, you're not going to continue to have this physical body. I know nowadays it's easy to just get caught on our addictions of cell phones and money and some of the other things that are so utterly addictive. Even fear can be addicting. Try to get away from those addictions. Try to find some peace and go somewhere where you can be in touch with those plants. Oh, Miigwech, Kekinawiya, thank you for listening. I hope you found some goodness here. Go to the woods, spend some time, put down your gifts, put down your offering, and get some good healing. Miigwech, Mizanawiye. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you so much, Hope. That was so informative. There were so many comments. Everybody was super excited to learn about all these different plants. There are a lot of people joining us from Canada, so there's a lot of different sort of climate-related questions that we might have to get back to people about. I will say right now, too, that we have about 200 people on. So we'll try to get to as many questions as we can, and we will try to follow up with some posts after this event so we can get some more of these questions answered. But now we'll get into a little bit of question Q&A for Hope. So does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask Hope?
I could just lift up a question I saw in the chat, Terry, if that's all right with you.
You can help me with that too.
Yeah, I saw a few questions come in. One question somebody asked, I'm non-native, is it okay for me to use, I'm paraphrasing, I'm non-native, is it okay for me to use tobacco to honor the plants? And then somebody else just asked in the chat, as a non-native person, where can I find tobacco?
Hey, I like that question. Here's my response to that. I was always told the currency of the spirit is in your work, in your love, in your what you focus your attention on. So one of the old ways of communicating with the spirits is making that red willow tobacco. In Ojibwe, they call it misko beamish. So in the wintertime, you collect those red willow sticks, and if you cut it, then you can replant it. You can put the ends in the waterways. If you're Lakota, it's Chansha. If you're Lakota, it's Chanshasha. If you're Dakota, it's Chandi. It's all the same. But you use that red stick, the red osier dogwood, gather it when it's really red. You can't miss it. Scrape the outside part, and then you're going to use that inside bark. That's that old Mitigo Asema. It's a stick tobacco. So then take those sticks and replant it, because that's one of those beautiful plants that it easily can be put back where it came from. So if you can do that, that's what I suggest. So be conscientious about count 10, pick one of whatever you gather, and be sure to put down something that's meaningful so you're respecting the spirit of that plant.
Thank you for that, Hope. Another question, well, let's just say that we had some people that were able to get us some questions submitted before this event on Eventbrite, and we had a lot of questions that were related to growing traditional medicines like sweetgrass and sage. Is there anything, Hope, you can kind of let people know about growing sweetgrass or sage?
Nowadays, it is kind of popular to do that. Sweetgrass and sage will grow wild, and you kind of tend it if you're gonna grow batches of it. I'm gonna say this is just from me and my teachings, and you might want to go to different people and ask them about it. Be careful about turning these gifts into money, because money is an addiction, and people in this society, they call it Wendigo sickness, where, oh my gosh, you want more, and you forget that you're dealing with what's really important: life, health, breath, the health of Mother Earth. And we can see the effects of that on our water, on our air, on our soil. We've got to remember, if we want to be healthy, don't intertwine health with money, because it ends up being we end up being the losers, because if we have bad air, bad water, bad food, it's no good for anybody. So make sure, if you're going to do something, check your motives. Why are you wanting to do that? And please don't turn our medicines into money.
Another question that we had received a little bit earlier from our Eventbrite questions is just any sort of, are there any sort of traditional plants or anything that you can say direct people towards to where they can kind of get some help with their diabetes?
Oh, gee, yeah. Okay, here's a story. There was for one thing, of course, it's that thing I keep talking about, the 4 directions, the mental, spiritual, physical, emotional. It's a tough one, but I can tell you this much. Some of you who might be my age or older might have known, there was a fellow, Jimmy Jackson was his name, very powerful medicine man that lived in the Twin Cities area and then moved up to Deer River when I was in my 20s. So it's a long time ago, but he had medicine to take away diabetes and it could take it away. But clearly he was working with the spirit of the plant. So what he would do is he would have people come to him, you know, and I remember being sent by an elder I was driving. We smelled burning cedar 4 times and we saw the swirling snow 4 times. And when we got to his door, he said, "I've got that medicine for you guys." And it was for her and for a friend of mine. And but he said, "You know, they're going to be watching you." I said, "What does that mean?" You know, so that night I go home and I'm laying in bed and a bundle of sage lands across my eyes. And so I call up my elder. I say, "What does that mean?" And she goes, "Oh, Jimmy, he works with those old Ojibwe spirits. They never use sage." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So just thinking in terms of that. So if you're looking at just the biology versus working with the spirits and the biology, there are quite a few medicines out there that are helpful. Probably want to do a liver cleanse and a kidney cleanse. Make sure you're in good shape before you start working with medicines. And I do want to say, this is another thing, be really careful because your body might not be used to some of those medicines. They might be something where you just do a little bit like, whoa, because all of our bodies are different, you know, and you know how it is even with medical doctor, you have to make sure this is something that agrees with your system. So I'm not going to get into particulars right now. I suppose one particular I can do, you can start with is, they call them Gijiko Ojanasug, the little green seed codes of the cedar tree. They're ready in late June. You can make a tea out of that just to get started. But you know, you're going to have to try to wake up that pancreas again. So it's a lot. It's a lot, but I'll pass with that.
Somebody had put into the chat, Andy had put in the chat, should we not purchase tobacco, sweetgrass, sage, or cedar from folks who are selling them for money, or people selling plant medicine? That is something that I think might be kind of important. And then maybe just to keep in mind, or just maybe if you could say a few words as well, or kind of connect it with what makes a plant. Can you say a little bit more about what makes a plant sacred, spiritual, or a medicine?
Oh, gee. I mean, you know, it's not as easy as all that, because you have to kind of follow what your family says. You know, maybe your family does it totally differently, and maybe you have no access. If you're living in the city and you have no access, that's the only way you can get a hold of those medicines, and they really help your family. So the line is not an easy line. You have to find ways that it feels like there's some balance. It's always about balance. So there are some that I'd say, don't go collect this to sell it for money. Like Labrador tea is one of them that I used to always hear elders say, don't sell that for money. That's our old tea for fighting colds and flus and things like that. So there's certain ones that are definitely lifted up, and it's like, oh, you know, protect that one, you know. So there's certain plants that you want to be more respectful of. But then if that's something that, you know, this is how my family did it, follow that too. The important part is remembering that the plant is just as alive as you are, and it's giving its life so that you might live, and to try to operate on that kind of a basis so that you're showing respect for that plant, for that relative, for that old medicine. So just remembering that it's not an easy, like, oh, quick healing, boom. No, sometimes you have to do the work too.
In the car. I didn't have Zoom downloaded on here yet. Kind of attic, but it's interesting.
Did that
She's
help?
talking about all the plants that we're growing.
Could I just remind everybody to probably mute themselves if they accidentally have their cameras on? I do it all the time. Don't worry. Thank you.
I see by my label that I'm Ashley Monk now.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Hope. Like that was really, really amazing. And we will be following up with different people in these questions after this panel. So we appreciate everything, Hope. We'll get back after this.
You might just say too, Owie, if you talk to an elder in your community and they'll say, oh, that old Hope, she doesn't know anything. That's all right too.
That would never happen. But thank
It
you so
might.
much, Hope. The next presenter that I am really excited to present right now is Jessika. Let's see. I'm sorry, I'm grabbing my document. Sorry, Jessika. Okay.
Get your way in the min, Hope.
Jimmy Grant.
All right. So Jessika will be our next presenter. Jessika is our seed keeper and farm manager at Dream of Wild Health. She is Ho Chunk from Baraboo, Wisconsin, and a member of the Deer Clan. Jessika is excited to be able to share her life's work of growing and protecting our seed relatives, her desire to regenerate the soils of our earth, and she is grateful for the opportunity to train and inspire our future seed keepers. Jessika has worked as the agricultural division manager for her nation and has previously served as a garden mentor within her nation's organic community gardens. She is a U.S. Army combat veteran and completed a veteran to farmer training program at the Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jessika. Thank you, Jessika.
Pino Kaderi, Hijan Kishina, Hinikadigiwina, Ochankrajada Gisada Sadich Maninga Ingaide. Good evening, everyone. I greet each and every one of you. My name is Jessika Greendeer, and my spirit name, Gisada Sadich Maning. I'm so grateful to be here with you. I'm always so honored to speak and to help give a voice to our seeds who are waiting for all of us to be ready. We are in a very different time than we were even a year and a half ago. And so there is so much for us to learn, so many bundles for us to pick up from our ancestors, and so much work that we need to continue to carry on for the future. I am going to do my absolute best to share and impart as much knowledge as I can in the next few minutes about your garden design for seed saving. So this is gathering all of my experience and knowledge that's been shared to me from my mentors, from books, from school. And so I hope you're with me for the ride. Of course, we can't do anything. We can't grow our seeds. And I understand that all of the work that I do, as beautiful as it is nothing without the help of Mother Earth. So taking care of Mother Earth is one of the things we'll talk about. We'll also discuss some seed sourcing, or where you can find seed, some seed saving considerations, as well as a little bit of garden layout. So of course, the soil, we're talking, today is Earth Day. We recognize it as Earth Day, but I know myself and probably several of you consider Earth Day to be every day. This is something that we need to continue to work on, to improve, and to also be living in a good, respectful way with the earth. So where you want to get started, maybe you have an existing garden, or you have some ideas of what you'd like to do. You want to soil test if you're planting somewhere brand new to you, or just some part of your property or place that you live that you have never planted into, or maybe you haven't seen anything grow. Of course, the most ideal place to garden is in fertile and well-drained soil. In my farming experience, I have planted in fertile and well-drained soil once. So don't get overwhelmed. This is something that, it's something that doesn't come overnight. It's an overtime thing, but as soon as you continue to start adding all of these, incorporate all of these styles into your growing system, you'll be able to see a lot of those benefits starting to come. So again, it's a lot about being patient and also doing the best you can, but remembering that we're also the youngest, those crabby babies, that sometimes it takes us a little bit longer to remember how to do something. When you are getting ready to plant your garden, so right around this time, for some of our relatives up in the First Nations, maybe you've got a little bit longer to wait, but at least for the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, now would be the time that you're trying to source any compost if you have it, maybe some old leaves that you've cleaned up, grass clippings, finished manure, if you have access to it, and of course, anything that is a compostable item. And so I do want to mention, I also do want to shout out that, you know, although we're getting our gardens ready, we also have to remember our insect relatives. So if many of you may participate in like a no mow May, you want to make sure that all of our little insect relatives have found their space to go. So please be mindful of that as you're turning things over. If you have an existing garden, you'll also be wanting to clean out any of the unnecessary debris. Maybe it's old plant residue that you have that may be diseased, or anything else that has found its way into the garden with the wind. You'll want to clean some of that out. You can either till or rake to start creating your seed beds and then get them ready for planting. All right, so I apologize. I feel really upset. I lost a ton of my photos on my cloud today. And so I had to dig way down in the vault for some of these, but here's an image of one of my garden helpers at home and building some raised beds. So for those of you who aren't able to plant into the soil that you live upon, you may want to consider a container garden or a raised bed. And Ashley's going to talk more about container gardening here in a little bit. But the raised beds will also lift up your crops for anyone who has accessibility issues. So maybe bending down isn't something you're able to do anymore, but you'll want to make sure that you have something high enough and of course something that you can reach across to or into the middle of the bed. I do want to mention, as you're thinking about soil or compost to purchase at a home improvement store or another reputable source in your area, you'll want to make sure that you have good, clean soil and compost that are coming into your garden. I know for some of our relatives to the east and the south, there's this being or invasive being called the jumping worm. And those jumping worms, when they come into your soil, will start eating your organic matter. And for those of you who want to grow organically, that's completely taking away all of that fuel and food that your seeds need to grow. So please be cautious of where you're finding your sources, and definitely check it out if you haven't heard of them already. So the garden placement, over the past year, so many of us have spent more time at home, maybe more time at home than we would have liked to. But this time of year is definitely the time when you want to consider your surroundings. When you're trying to find a good place to put your garden, you want to look not only at your available space, but you want to follow the sun throughout the day. If you leave your home every day at 7 a.m., you always know where the sun is or in the general direction, but do you know what the sun looks like at 11 a.m.? You'll want to look at different structures that surround your property if you live in the city, and also be cautious of utility lines. You don't ever really want to grow food underneath a utility line, so try to find the best spot for you. Unfortunately, when homes are built or apartment buildings are erected, the thought of growing food around the space is not generally taken into consideration. So find a good spot. And, you know, also during this time, our trees are budding. but our leaves are not fully canopied yet. So also consider what the trees are going to look like when they're full of leaves. And conveniently, to help yourself out, you want to hopefully get your garden as close to your water source as possible. If not, maybe you have some long hoses or other items that can help you irrigate your garden during the summertime. So this small image of a cedar, I did several cedar raised beds at home. The dimensions of these beds are 8 by 4 by 2. And so I know with some of our relatives in the city who have issues with soil contamination, if you're able to lift your plants up and get them 2 feet before they're going to even touch the soil, it's going to improve the health of the crops, but also improve your health by ingesting only those good healthy veggies. So these particular beds, I have lots of moles that like to hang out. So I had stapled hardware cloth all the way across the bottom so nothing could come in. I then layered the bottom layer with brown cardboard with no tape, no labels. If there was anything else on it, I would take it off. So do not use colored cardboard because there are different chemicals in there that will break down and eventually stay in your soil. On top of the cardboard was gravel-sized pieces of rock that I had used from like the previous homeowner's landscaping project. So I was able to reuse that in an effort to help with a little bit of filtering there within the bed. And then the third layer, I used decomposing wood, dead sticks, dried corn cobs, and then also hay and straw to sort of fill in the gaps there. And so I did, within my raised beds, created hugelkultur systems. So essentially all of that decomposing matter there below the soil is going to start breaking down and then feeding your plants. So it's a good way to sort of naturally fertilize your garden. And then of course, the top layer is a whole lot of soil. And so if you can fit other stuff in there, that's great. Of course, you want to make sure you have enough soil to grow into, but also when planting a raised bed, if you peak the center of your soil up to the middle, you can actually gain another square foot of growing space. So consider that as well if you only have space for one raised bed. Moving into seed sourcing. For the seeds that we grow at Dream of Wild Health within our seed regeneration work, we're growing open pollinated heirloom varieties that are non-GMO, non-genetically engineered. And also another key tag is OG, which is organically grown. You'll want to look for those seeds and also ensure that any seeds that you're bringing into your garden are that way. That way, when you're trying to live a good life, you know that you've got good seed or you're starting with good seed. For those of you who come from communities with seed keepers or seed keeping groups, I encourage you to seek them out and see if there's your own ancestral seeds that you'd be able to grow within your own garden. Of course, with many libraries, many of the public libraries within Minneapolis have their own little seed library. So if you're able to grab from there, I would definitely do that. And moving into some of the seed companies. So of course you can grab a catalog from anywhere. And the catalogs are like so exciting. They always warm your heart during that winter time where things are just like really cold, but you're dreaming about the garden. You know, some of the seed companies who are trying to do rematriation work by either giving seed or royalties to Native communities are Seed Savers Exchange and Fedco. Of course, there probably are a couple other seed companies, but these are the two that I know of or have worked with in the past. But definitely look to see, make sure you're looking for those open pollinated and heirloom varieties. I do want to mention you can grow a hybrid seed and save seed from it. However, you would have to grow that seed for 7 years and continue to select from it to be able to stabilize that variety. And so what you get from that very first year from the hybrid is not what you would get from the second year. So just be aware of that. If you're purchasing a hybrid seed, that you've got a little bit of work ahead of you. So seed saving considerations. You need, like the easiest thing to do is to figure out what your family consumes on a regular basis. And maybe that's carrots, or it's lettuce, or it's an ancestral variety of bean or corn. And so thinking of the things that you like to see on your table are the things that you want to see in your garden. Hope had touched a lot on this. Hope does the work with the wild plants, and I do my work with the domesticated plants, but they are both plant beings that you're forming a relationship with. It's not an object that you're just placing into the ground. Our ancestral seeds have spirit, and we need to make sure that whatever you're able to take on, you're able to fully embrace. For me, my seeds are my babies. They're my children. And there are so many other seed workers who believe the same thing or something to that effect. And so we also have to remember how much we're willing to take on and how much we're able to do for the entire growing season. And maybe it is a very small garden that you're starting with, but you're being very intentional about growing a relationship with the earth that you live upon, the seeds that you're growing with, the seeds that you plan to share with other people. And remembering that although we plan our gardens for what we hope to be able to harvest and consume with our family, we have to remember that there's also other living beings that are hungry for some of those same foods. So if you do have the space, you'll want to plant a little bit extra for them to make sure that everybody gets a little taste of it. And of course, good intentions in the garden will definitely make for sweeter fruit and gracious seed. Your seeds will be so much more appreciative for your lack of attitude in the garden. And they just enjoy it more. It's just like as you were picking up a baby, you want to make sure that your hands are clean, or you don't have anything dangling that the baby's going to get. And your energy changes. Your energy changes when you're going to hold the baby. So consider that as you start your relationship with the earth, or continue your relationship with the earth this growing season. Now, going externally outside of your garden, you also want to consider what's being grown in your neighbor's yard, and also where your prevailing winds are coming from. If you're trying to grow an ancestral variety of corn or some other open pollinated variety of seed, and somebody upwind from you is trying to grow another variety of that particular seed, you'll want to make sure that you are in conversation. Some of our seeds are wind pollinated, like corn, for instance. So you'll want to ensure that you've got no corn growing upwind, or to be able to time your particular growing so it's off the pollination period of your neighbor. You also want to see what you actually have space for. So if you decided you wanted to grow onions, you can grow a whole lot more onions in 1 square foot than you could a tomato plant. A tomato plant is going to take up a lot more space. But that onion, if you were to grow it to seed, like those, some of our below the ground, below the soil crops are biennial plants. And so they wouldn't go to seed until their second year or their second season. So you really have to decide what it is that you'd like to grow or what you have space for. I do all of my growing off on my own, I've always staggered my planting times. And so, yes, you can hand pollinate your varieties of squash and corn, or other varieties of seed if you decide to do that. But it's so much more natural to allow our plant relatives to do what they've been doing since time immemorial. And that's to be able to have that sacred dance on their own. Definitely, I recommend staggering your planting times, whether that means that you're transplanting a crop or you're starting it a little bit later than something else that you're growing. These are a couple crops that if you have you have a more like a full sun yard or a full sun garden, these are some crops that really enjoy that type of environment. And of course, like things can always, you can always manipulate things. You can always change the landscape of where you're at. And, you can do that. My philosophy is you try to work with what you have. So don't put too much effort into completely changing the landscape of your property to do one particular crop. Maybe you have a neighbor that would be willing to share in the harvest if you were able to maintain and put a garden in their yard. And these are some of our plant relatives that we're able to grow in like more undisturbed sunlight with like 4 to 6 hours. If they have a little bit more, they're still okay. But this is sort of their sweet spot for what they would prefer. So moving into the garden layout, this was one of my seed gardens from several years ago. And so I had it sort of mapped out. The sun came from the right side of your screen to the left side. And so to the left of the screen and on the other side of the tree line, there was actually other corn. And so these babies had gone into the garden a lot earlier than I had wanted to, but wanted to get the timing right with the pollination. The sunflowers have been a huge blessing. Some tribes consider them to be another sister. But the leaves of the sunflower form this beautiful wall that really does not allow any pollen to penetrate it. So my corn was very happy. And what was so cute watching this particular garden grow is that the corn was like matching the sunflower. And then one day the sunflowers just shot up. And so it's beautiful to be a part of that. And to see what they're doing, what they're feeling. And it's just one of my favorite places to be is in the garden. Some of the resources, again, we just barely scratch the surface on a lot of things. We're trying to cram like years of knowledge down. So some of the resources I recommend are the Seed Garden from Seed Savers Exchange. They have amazing little write-ups for every family of crop. In the back, they also show like how many plants you need to grow to have a good biodiversity within your seed, as well as like your isolation distances. And again, don't forget about isolating by time. And then another excellent seed book is The Organic Seed Grower by Dr. John Navazio. And that book will give you some other ideas on like how to process your seed, but also a solid resource. Of course, we can't do any of this work without the earth. So Building Soils for Better Crops by Fred Magdoff and Harold Van Ness. And we didn't get to talk about it. I know we might lightly brush up on it with Ashley, but my favorite companion planting book is Carrots Love Tomatoes and Roses Love Garlic. And so you can get some really great ideas on how you want to incorporate companion planting, not only into your garden, but also into your seed-saving garden. And thank you so much for your time. Waingan Epshana, Pinagigi, and Kateri, I'll kick it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. So much knowledge. Everybody was filling up the chat with just thanks and thanks for sharing your knowledge about all this stuff. All right, so last but not least, we have Ashley. Sorry, I'm grabbing my doc again. Ashley is the Distribution and Operations Supervisor with Dream of Wild Health. They are an activist, farmer, and mycologist and practice radical community healthcare and mutual aid in the so-called Twin Cities. Ashley has practiced regenerative agriculture and mycology with urban and rural farming projects in the Midwest and New York. They are passionate about food sovereignty, dismantling racism in the food system, and organizing farmers and community members around reparations toward collective liberation. Without further ado, I will introduce Ashley. Ashley, it's been such a great pleasure getting to meet you and or getting to know you over the past year or so. And take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Kateri. Bonjour, my name's Ashley. My pronouns are they, them. It's an honor to be here with you all, Miigwech, Hope, and Jessika, for your amazing, inspiring presentations. I'm so honored to be on a panel with both of you and be in space with everyone who is here right now. Tyra, can you pull up the slides? All right, you can flip to the first slide.
Rodney, ready?
So I'm going to be talking about garden design for small spaces. So I know Jessika touched on a lot of really wonderful stuff related to soil health, but when we're growing in small spaces, we're going to be cramming a lot into those spaces. We're going to maybe be using raised beds and container gardening. And so it's really, really important to take really good care of our soil. So looking at doing some composting with worms, which is called vermicomposting at home. And just thinking about feeding our plants really well, using cover crops, following all those practices that Jessika talked about earlier. Next slide. I just wanted to add this slide. So we talked about soil health and we talked about raised beds and container gardening. So when we're talking about growing in urban areas, it's really important to think about soil contamination and be thinking about remediation of contaminated soil as well. So it's really important to, especially if you're growing on a new piece of land or building a new garden and haven't grown there before, to know the history of the land use in that space. And if you can, to get your soil tested for heavy metals and other contaminants. So there's some resources on this slide that'll direct you to where you can get your soil tested and how to do that. If you're unsure about the history and you're not able to get a soil test and you're worried about contamination, your best bet is going to be to think about using some kind of container gardening or building raised beds, using containers, but using soil that you know is safe and hasn't been contaminated. So the reality of environmental racism in our urban environments means that many of our sacred soils in our neighborhoods have been contaminated with heavy metals or other toxins. And that doesn't mean we need to fear the earth or fear the soil. It just means that we need to know what we're dealing with and try to reduce risks and potential harm. So if you get your soil tested, you're gonna know what's in it. And it's okay to grow in moderately contaminated soils. But you need to make sure that you're taking precautions to do that safely. So considerations here on this slide that are listed, and this goes for when there's some contamination, but they're not so contaminated that they're completely unsafe to grow in. So we'll share, I think we'll be able to share these links out so you can look at a chart. So when you get that soil test back, you can see what are unsafe levels for anything to grow or unsafe levels for certain crops. So some of the things that we can do to reduce risk and potential heavy metal poisoning is planting away from busy roads, planting away from busy highways. The same is true if you're going to be doing any foraging, making sure that those plants aren't coming from places that are close to really busy roadways. Planting away from painted structures and foundations, especially with older buildings where there's the possibility of lead contamination. Physically removing any visible contaminants, any like pieces of metal, things like that that you might see that might be in there. Sometimes it's really important to think about where you're sourcing your compost from. Not all compost is created equal. If you're getting compost and there's lots of weird stuff in it, might want to consider a different source, which is why composting and vermicomposting at home is so awesome and it's way cheaper. So other things we can do to reduce risk with contaminated soils are using mulch or cover crops. These help minimize and keep the dust down, and they also help build organic matter, which also again helps reduce some of those risks associated with contaminated soils. And then working with soil when it's not totally dry, again, trying to avoid kicking up dust. So making sure the soil is moist when we're working with it. Protecting your skin, wearing gloves, make sure you have long pants, long shirts on, just keeping your skin covered. And then once you're done gardening, making sure that you are removing those clothes, removing those shoes, ideally before you go back inside your home, being really mindful to keep any of those clothing or shoes away from small children. Making sure that those clothes and shoes get washed really well, separate from other items. And then making sure you wash your hands really, really well. And then thinking about what kind of crops, there's different risks associated with different kinds of crops. So heavy metals concentrations are highest in leaves and roots. So like leafy greens, roots like carrots or beets. And so a suggestion would be to think about growing fruiting crops for less accumulated potential heavy metals. And then last but not least, making sure to wash your vegetables really thoroughly. Worried about, again, like contaminated soil on the outside of your veggies, making sure you're scrubbing them really well. There's some resources here around remediation, as well as just learning more about soil contamination and things that we can do to reduce risk. So I've got my favorite book on remediation is Earth Repair by Lila Darwish. I can't recommend this book enough. It's so good. It's got so many great ideas for, as small as your backyard remediation, but also like taking on remediation projects in your community with your neighbors. And we'll make sure that folks have access to these links and resources.
Can you say that book one more time, Ashley?
Yeah, the book is called Earth Repair, and it's by Lila Darwish. So when we talk about remediation, we're talking about removing the contaminants from the soil or reducing the contaminants in the soil. That's what we talk about when I say remediation. That's what I'm referring to. So there's different ways you can do it. There is mycoremediation, which is remediating with mushrooms and fungi. There's phytoremediation, which is using plants to remediate the soil. So things like sunflowers will actually pull the toxins out of the soil and accumulate in that plant instead. And then there's also bioremediation, which is working with other living organisms, things like composting, vermicomposting, those types of things are included in that bioremediation. So really cool ideas in that book, as well as in the other resources that are listed here. And then I think also worth mentioning is there's a link you can follow so I'm in so-called Minnesota, but the Pollution Control Agency here, you can actually like search your neighborhood and see if there's any known contamination leaks, stuff like that. Next slide. Jessica touched on this a good bit, so I won't go super in depth, but just thinking about what do you want to grow and how do you choose what to plant? So the main thing, what do you like to eat? What do you like to cook with? What medicines are important to you? Do you plan to share the harvest? Do you want to store and or preserve anything that you're growing for the cold season? Winter is really long here, and it's really hard to grow here in the winter. What does your space look like environmentally? How much sun, how much shade? What's the temperature? And then thinking about how much space does each plant take up and what do you have space for? And we're going to be talking a lot about space and expanding space. So can you make more space? The answer is probably yes. And then another thing to think about, Jessica touched on this too, but like growing in community. So can you grow at another location? Are there people in your community that you can work with? So is there a neighbor's yard or a friend's balcony or patio, a fire escape, a community garden, a rooftop, maybe your place of work? Maybe there's a school or a church or a senior center that's got extra space. I know a lot of schools haven't been using their raised bed gardens because of distance learning. Boulevards are another good one, but any vacant spaces that you can think of, doing a little guerrilla gardening, maybe asking for permission, maybe not. Next slide. So just a word on I think the most fun part is being creative. Coming up with creative solutions and thinking about what's in your waste stream locally. Are there things that you could repurpose or use either in your household, in your neighborhood, at work, at school? Let me move forward to the next slide. Yeah, and so many of us who live in the city are already growing in small spaces. So we're going to be talking about bio-intensive growing, intercropping, and vertical growing, which all allows us to maximize space and grow more. There's a lot of really, I'll just preface this with, there's a lot of really awesome stuff, like just searching on Google. So if you look up like pallet gardening, vertical gardening, recycled container gardening, really cool stuff, especially with plastic bottles. So I wanted to, this is a picture of our greenhouse right now. So we've got on the left side, small tomatoes in small containers. And on the right side, these tomatoes have been potted up. We've moved them from a small container to a bigger container where they're gonna live until it is warm enough to plant them outside. So potting up, which is when we're starting the seeds inside of a container. And as they grow, we're going to give them a little bit bigger container. And eventually we're going to move them and transplant them outside. So this is a really awesome way to maximize the growing season here in a cold climate, but also save space and save time and be more efficient as we're growing. And you can use all kinds of recycled containers as you're potting up. So things like yogurt containers or other like plastic bottles, milk or juice jugs that are cut in half, toilet paper rolls, paper towel rolls, newspaper, to-go cups, to-go containers, lots of really good options here. And then we don't get a lot of daylight here in the winter. And so considering a supplemental light source, trying to maximize that you can use those Mylar emergency blankets to help reflect light in your growing space, and maybe thinking about some supplemental heat. Next slide.
Ash, you're right at about 7 minutes, just FYI.
Thank you, appreciate that. All right, now we are gonna just go through some examples to get folks thinking and get some visuals. The possibilities are endless. We are only limited by our imagination and I guess a few other constraining factors that I'll talk about when thinking about what to grow in, how to grow vertically, how to grow in containers, lots of options. So this is a really great slide. So the picture on the right is a photo taken from Growing Power in Milwaukee, which was an urban farm. And so you can see in this space, there's these pots that are all over the ground. And then there is a rack that has poles on top of it. So those are actually for hanging pots on top of those poles. And then on top of the poles, you can add more layers. So you're creating kind of makeshift tables. And then you can see a lot of the pots that are on the ground actually have hooks that have just been created. It's wire with a little hook on the end that wrap around the pots so that the pots can hang. And then to the left of that, all of those bins that are there are actually vermicomposting bins, so producing our own soil and fertility. And then you can see there's lots of pots that are hanging from the poles, the rafters that are in that greenhouse. So this is only partially being used right now, but if it was being fully used, right, there'd be all those pots hanging from those poles. There'd be extra layers on top of it, like mini tables. So really maximizing space here and not only having containers on the ground, but also hanging the containers. And then the picture on the left, that is baby kale that we just harvested from our greenhouse today. So you can see those are all actually pots that are just on the ground in our greenhouse, where there's some extra space right now, not for long, but really dense. Like those pots have a lot of produce coming out of them. So you can really grow a lot of food in these really small containers. The really cool thing, so these are all called, you can kind of see in the bottom right picture, it looks like it's a mix of 5-gallon buckets. And then there's a mix of landscaping pots, which is what our baby kale is growing in. So landscaping pots you can get for free, usually, if you know where to look. So you can approach your local landscaping companies. You can approach your local garden stores. There are many pots that they're actually not able to recycle and they have to pay to throw away. So if you approach them and ask for pots, they will likely just give them to you for free. Next slide. So this is a really awesome chart. This chart was pulled from Farming While Black by Leah Penniman. So this has container sizes for vegetables. So these are like the minimum container size and suggestions for how many plants to fit per pot. So really, really awesome stuff here. And you can experiment with some of these numbers and probably push and pull them a little bit as long as you're feeding your soil well. And I guess a word on pots, like I said, the nice thing is they're small, you can carry them around, you can hang them. They'll fit on balconies, porches, your steps, wherever there's space for them. And really you have a lot of options for containers. So they can be plastic, they can be clay, they can be ceramic. You can make raised beds out of untreated wood, like Jessica showed earlier. 5-gallon buckets, old cat litter buckets, recycled plastic containers, old coffee tins and bags. I talked about the landscaping pots, really so many possibilities for upcycling. You just want to make sure that whatever container you're using has drainage holes, and you want to make sure that whatever that container is made of is non-toxic and isn't going to leach chemicals. And you're going to want to know if it's a used container, what was in that container before to make sure that there's no toxins there. And then again, like when positioning your pots, you want to think about sunlight. You want a minimum of 6 hours of sun. Again, depending on what you're growing, you can push and pull that a little bit. The pots are going to dry out and other vessels are going to dry out faster than if you're growing in the ground or growing in a larger vessel. So just making sure that you're staying on top of watering to keep those plants happy. And like I said, get creative, like see what is going to waste in your house or in your neighborhood. There's lots of options that are free. You can always go to the store, of course, and buy pots, but there's a lot of options out there that can be upcycled. Next slide. This is another, more examples of container gardening. So these are actually gutters. We just bought pieces to make gutters. Those are gutters on pieces of wood. Pretty cool. They grow a lot of food, and they can also, we have them on the ground right now, but they could be stood up and put against a wall. Next slide. I know I'm running short on time. Sorry. Just more examples of ways that you can hang pots and other vessels. So you're looking at a couple of some mushroom bags that are hanging. So just using paracord rope that was lying around or old twine. In the middle, we used old fencing and created a container to hang stuff. Again, that example is a mushroom bag, but it could be a pot if you want it to be a pot. And then there are pots out there, again, that come with things to hang them, but you can also make your own. Next slide. And then here's some more ideas. We kind of talked through some of containers. Another thing I wanted to point to was trellising. So you can create your own trellises at home, or you can buy trellises. My suggestion is to find things that are free and can be upcycled to make your own trellises. So you can take a walk in the woods, find some really awesome sticks, but you can also use netting, chicken wire, old fencing, scrap lumber. If you have a fence in your backyard, those are often already the perfect trellis. Go to the next slide. Pallets are another awesome free source material. So here we've got on the far left side, you can see we made a pallet and we put a back on the pallet and filled it with soil, and it's got nasturtium and other good stuff growing out of it. And same thing in the middle, you've got a pallet that is screwed into a wall, secured into a wall. So we're using wall space to grow. And then we also have these other tables that are made out of pallets. Pallets can be found for free around the city generally. Next slide. And then here is a word on doing so lots of different words here. They all are falling into the same category of companion planting or multi-cropping, interplanting, using polycultures. So this is where we're growing multiple things in the same space. So I would love if you have your favorite combinations that you like to grow together. If you want to drop those in the chat so other people can see what people are using. We talk a lot about Three Sisters. Three Sisters is a wonderful example of multi-cropping. And so when we're multi-cropping, we're stacking functions, we're thinking like an ecosystem. These plants have mutually beneficial relationships and are serving beyond just the plants themselves. We can think about beneficial insects and pollinators. And so when we're thinking about what do we want to plant together, like how do we intercrop or interseed, you're going to want to think about how quickly are the crops maturing. So each seed packet will always have like days to maturity. You're going to want to look at that. Thinking about plant height and size and pairing small, fast growing with smaller plants, growing underneath trellis plants, thinking about light considerations, thinking about mycorrhizal plants. So pairing non-mycorrhizal plants with mycorrhizal plants. And by that, I mean that things in the amaranth family like beets or chard or spinach, or things in the brassica family like broccoli, kale, mustard greens, stuff like that. Those plants don't form a relationship with mycorrhizal fungi. And so you maybe want to consider planting those with other things that do. That mycorrhizal fungi create mycelial networks underneath in the soil and increase the availability of nutrients and improve drought tolerance. Let's see. And so we've got some other examples here. I encourage you to check out the chat. I think people are dropping stuff there. Yeah, there's some good stuff in there. I dropped a few examples in this slide, but tomatoes are really awesome to play around with intercropping because they're tall. They grow for a really, really long time, which means you can grow things that are smaller and grow really quickly underneath them. Incorporating, anytime you can incorporate flowers or herbs that flower with other plants to attract pollinators and attract beneficial insects. I definitely encourage folks to do that. There's other, lots of examples here. So you're encouraged to just experiment, record your observations, play around, talk to other people, like what's working for folks. Next slide. This is a suggested chart. So this has, you can look at the left and top sides here, but this is a companion planting chart. So there's little smiley faces for things that like to be planted together, and there's X's for these things don't mesh together well. On the right side, there are suggestions for I don't know. Yeah, so for what are considered pest insects here to ward some of those off. I know folks had questions about like deer or other things that like to go grazing in the garden. So there's some good suggestions here, thinking about using things in the allium family like onions, garlic, chives, or thinking about using aromatic plants is another good one. So aromatic herbs. Next slide. Last but not least, we got some questions.
I did just want to add really quickly that I just put the link for this slide into the chat.
Awesome, thank you. Can you go to the next slide, please? The screen is frozen. Oh, can you go back one? Awesome, thank you. So we're in Minnesota right now, and winter is really long here, which means the growing season is kind of short here. And also thinking about too, not everyone has a yard or a balcony. So there are still things that you can grow. There's still food that you can grow yourself or forage for yourself. So some suggestions we had for thinking about late fall and early spring, which are really long here. So thinking about foraging in those seasons, there's all the things that Hope talked about. There's so much abundance out right now. And then as you're doing garden planning, thinking about growing storage crops. So things that you grow in the main season, but that are going to last for months and months and months over the winter. So things like onions, winter squash, potatoes, garlic, cabbage, and then thinking about during this season doing food preservation, things like canning, drying, freezing. This is such a big part of food sovereignty and creating local food systems. And then a few other suggestions are microgreens and sprouts, which can be grown at home, doesn't require very much, just a little bit of soil, actually doesn't even require that. Water in a container, very little required to grow these things. Encourage folks to look into those. They're really easy to grow at home, and they're also really nutrient dense. So microgreens and sprouts are all the energy from the plant before it grows up into a big plant. All that energy that's contained into the seed goes directly into the microgreen, and that's what you're eating. So a lot of those microgreens and sprouts are actually 10, 20 times more nutrient dense than the full version size of that crop. And then last but not least, wanted to mention mushrooms here. You can flip to the last slide. Mushrooms, in particular, oyster mushrooms, are really easy to grow at home. They will grow on almost anything. So here are a couple of pictures of oyster mushrooms growing on coffee grounds that you can put into a jar every morning after your cup of morning coffee, or source from your local coffee shop for free. So lots of options to still have nutrient dense foods year round, or inside, even when we don't have access to outdoor growing space. And that's all I have. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, there's so much information crammed into this. Everybody has been so excited. Ashley, I don't know if you were able to kind of catch a lot of the stuff in the chat, but everybody's just like really excited to be learning this stuff. Thank you again for your presentation just now, Ashley. One thing I wanted to point out really quick before I forget, because I meant to mention this right before Ashley started, but Tyra, do you have that survey that we can pop into the chat?
I just added it to the chat.
Okay, and so this is a quick survey. If everybody could please do their best to take a minute or two while we're kind of wrapping up here to fill that out, that would be greatly appreciated. And I apologize. Let's get into the Q&A for Ashley and Jessika. Oh, well, let's just throw a question out there that kind of related to both y'all. Okay, so one of the questions that we got was, please talk about raised bed options, especially for elders with arthritis challenges.
I can go first, Ash. I know I have seen, they've also had disabled veteran gardens or accessibility gardens. So essentially it's a small trellis or a small hanging pot holder that will come up, and then you're able to plant into hanging pot holders. So sorry, everyone, it's a little late, I guess. Yeah, so there's that access that if somebody had a walker or a wheelchair, they can sort of like still be able to see what's in there, pull out what they'd like. And I'm not sure, Ash, if you have another system that works well.
Yeah, accessible raised beds should yield lots of wonderful things on Google search. And then I would also suggest pallets, again, which can be sourced for free. And you can purchase or try to find legs for those pallets so that you can customize the height that you want them at.
Just want to mention about the pallets, make sure they're heat treated pallets. It'll say like HT on it and not chemically treated.
Another question that we had was, could you please talk a little bit, or no, what would you do to care for the raised bed prior to winter and to get it ready for the next season in the spring? Are all parts in the layers replaced?
I can speak to the raised beds I have at home. If any of them need maintenance, you can of course tighten any screws, add another support if you need to. What I did with my raised beds is I have green garlic growing in 2 of them. And so they were mulched, covered in hay. I did top off my beds before the winter. And then they also got a small treatment of hay mulch over the top just to sort of prevent any blowing wind coming through and eroding some of that soil or taking it away.
And I would just add to that, mulching, yes, absolutely. You can also cover crop in raised beds.
Another question we just got was, could you guys maybe say a few things or a few words about till methods?
I think it was no-till method.
No-till method.
Absolutely. So unfortunately at the farm, we are trying to get to a no-till or a reduced till farm. But where I learned how to become a farmer, they're all about no-till. So I did bring my roller crimper to Dream of Wild Health, and essentially that lays down all of your biomass, any type of grasses that you're growing. It'll lay it down, and you only run that piece of equipment when the plants are about to senesce or as they go to seed or start forming their seed. So just before they flower, you'll knock them over, and now you have a complete acreage of mulch. And from there, you would then add like a no-till grain drill or something like that to be able to plant a no-till planter, which essentially has big caster wheels that'll help cut through the residue and form a seed furrow for you, or be able to transplant directly into that. They're beautiful systems. They're so good for the soil. It just takes a little bit of time to get there. And again, it's one of those overtime changes, not overnight. So they're beautiful systems if you can incorporate them now, or at least work toward getting there.
Thanks, Jessica. Another thing that had come up in the chat a little bit was testing soil. And then I had brought up that you can buy pH things to test the acidity in the soil. And obviously that's different, but could you guys say a couple things or let people know if there's a way for people to kind of test soil?
Your local extension office is an excellent source, and usually they also have a soil probe for you, either a soil probe, or you can just go out there with a little hand shovel and then take samples of, you're going to want to sort of hop all over the place to try and get an effective soil gathering. You can mix the soil up into a container. So you've got a little bit of everything in there, bag it for the extension office and send it off. I do want to mention, because I know I saw it earlier, about an offering, and I know Hope gave a beautiful, shared beautifully about giving an offering to the earth. Yes, before we till, before we break the soil, we always ask for permission and also provide an offering. For me, it's tobacco, but use what is culturally significant for you. So just, yeah, wanting to make sure we got that covered as well.
So I don't know if you guys saw, but we have a ton of people from Canada, all over. And like, there was just a few questions about cold plant. What was it? Sorry. Supporting plants in cold climates. Could you guys say a couple things about possibly supporting plants?
Yeah, so we we have a pretty good system at the farm. You know, essentially we have a nice little heated education size greenhouse. And it also is equipped with some heating mat tables or heating mats on the table. So that gives them some of that extra love. Of course, when you have, you can also build cold frames around any of those more frost tolerant or frost hardy crops out in the field. Make sure that you also mulch the soil and give it a nice good covering. And you'll feel it if you're to lay several inches of mulch on your soil inside of a cold frame for your plants. You can actually feel that heat and that decomposition happening. And so it just keeps things a little warm, not steamy for the plant.
We also use low tunnels, which are a pretty easy thing to build. So we take, I wish I had a photo of it, but we take 2 pieces of rebar, like across from each other. And then we buy, I think it's 1/2 inch PVC. It's the thin enough PVC to easily be able to bend it into a hoop. So you take one end of the PVC, put it over the rebar, and bend it over to the other piece of rebar. You now have a hoop. So you make a tunnel that is low, and you can put clear plastic over the top of it. We use Rime, also known as row cover, which helps keep those plants a little warmer, but also lets the sunlight through. You can combine those things. Those are really important for cold season growing, and we utilize those. We'll actually utilize those inside of a high tunnel. So we really, really are taking advantage of that season extension as much as we can.
Another thing that had come up a lot in the chat is just basically about how Dream of Wild Health, and if Dream of Wild Health is going to get into more seed saving workshops. Do you guys have anything that you would like to say about that? I know that I'll just let everybody know, Dream of Wild Health went from 10 to 30 acres at the beginning of COVID, and we're just in a really huge growth stage. So we just have a lot of different things going on. Do you guys have any upcoming plans to start doing some different seed saving activities?
Yeah, great question, Kateri. I definitely think that we could probably add a seed saving element to our next workshop, which is the hand pollination workshop. And historically we hold that in July. But you know, if you do have ideas for things that you'd like to see or like to see more of, and you are not local to the area, definitely send us that feedback. You know, a lot of our education is shaped to what you all need and what you need help with, and what you want to learn more about. So please send us that feedback. Of course, if you are local to the area, make sure you follow us for our Volunteer Fridays, and you can even bring a sample in or see something that we have going on at the farm and be able to take some of those skills home with you.
We also had a lot of questions about general foraging. I know that we have a lot of different activities. We do plant walks sometimes. That is definitely something that I would like to work with Hope a little bit more to kind of develop some foraging and plant walk activities. Hope, could you say a little bit more about that? And if we, you know, might get into that soon, or what you think?
Sure. I feel very fortunate in our area. We have so many different, well, I guess what you would call biomes that, gee, you go to one place and there's these plants, and then you go to someplace else and there's a whole new bounty of plants. So there's so much to kind of discover and to keep looking for what's out there. Just this week, we spoke to our IFN partners about, you know, just let us know when you need plant walks. I know I've been doing a lot of plant walks lately. I'll be doing, last weekend, we did a bird and plant walk that some people attended. And Monday, I'll be doing a plant walk with Anda Young, the youth program, just to show from last Saturday, it's going to be slightly different. Like just in the last few days here, the trout lilies came up, and that's one of my absolute favorite for food. And that was a really productive food source over in British Columbia too, that some people would say, if you could gather 200 pounds of food, of trout lilies at this time of year, you were set for the year. You would make it through the year. So you would know that, you know, you can do that. And so there's things like that where there's wild plants out there that are so generous, even though they're just up for a little while because they're here while the spring ephemerals are here.
Thank you for that, Hope. I'll just mention again too, in this survey, we just posted it in the chat again. Please take a couple minutes to fill that out if you have just a second. And also on this survey, there's a place for people to put your ideas for things that you might want to see from Dream of Wild Health in the future too. So. Let me ask another foraging related question real quick. People just kind of wanted to know a little bit more about what sort of weeds might be considered something that could be medicinal, just some general things. I know that you really like mustard greens and things, but like, are there any sort of plants you'd like to highlight real quick?
I do. Thank you for asking. I appreciate that question. You know, often while we're weeding, if you're in a situation where you're weeding gardens, so often there's things that are just like amazing food sources. Like one that I like to bring up, but probably people don't think about it, is something is like purslane. Purslane, you have to pay for it in Middle Eastern countries. So like at the Holy Land market, not far from where I live, you buy it, you know, and then at the farm, we decided, let's see what we can do with purslane. So we pickled it and we stir fried it. And then one of the things that I'm always thinking now is what's going to happen with climate change. So I'm always curious about looking at environments that are south of here, to think, okay, that might be what's coming next, just to get an idea, to be conscientious about things are on the move and things are changing. So let's be mindful and keep an eye out for what might be coming next. So purslane is a perfect example of that. I was checking that out just recently to see, okay, this is growing south, it's doing really well, it's a wonderful plant, and it's giving these nutritious, this food source. Some of the undervalued ones. I know Ashley was with me this weekend, and we were looking at wild chervil. Another name for that is honewort, and it's delicious. I mean, if you want to look for, you know, the chefs pay big money for that, for making spicing up a dish. But it likes the wild, like the same kind of environment as like the trout lilies. It likes a wet woodland area. But you can also think in terms of what's coming around and doesn't have to be particular, like garlic mustard. I always tell the story of one of my interns would go down by the river and gather garlic mustard because it's an invasive species, right? And then she would sell it to one of the high-end restaurants, you know, because they would make pesto out of it. So a lot of times that's true about, you know, if you just kind of give a plant a chance and find out what its gift is, and think of it that way, is that each one has a gift. If we don't know what it is, that's us. Like I always think, I'm looking for that gift on that European buckthorn. So there's a few that are a little tougher than other ones.
Jessica, Ashley, do you guys have anything else that you would like to add? We're right at the end here, but if you guys have anything that you would like to say.
I wanted to add one more thing. I love that Ashley brought up the oyster mushrooms. There's a golden oyster that has recently moved into this area. And see, sometimes like they're considering that an invasive. So sometimes you're like, wow, here's this amazing food source. Just because it's called an invasive doesn't mean it doesn't have its gift, I want to say.
Yeah, my closing thought, I would love to see what people's gardens end up looking like. You know, of course, we're always here for you. We're in this together. It's so incredibly important for everybody to learn as much as they can and learn from their mistakes for this gardening season. I mean, I don't know everything. I always learn something every growing season. Love to see some of your garden pictures. I think they're going to be amazing. So happy gardening. Thank you.
You good, Ash?
Just echoing what Jessica and Hope both said, would love to see your gardening pictures. And just like right now, I'm super appreciating all the wild plants because they're up and they're feeding us before our cultivated plants are.
Well, we really appreciate everybody spending some time during Earth Day with us. We're really, really passionate about the things that we do, and we're really excited that you guys are able to spend some time with us. Keep an eye on our social media. Please keep an eye on our IFN postings. We're going to be doing more activities like this. We'll be doing the hand pollination activity in a month or so. Just please keep posted. And we just appreciate you guys coming today. And yep, happy Earth Day, everyone. And thank you again, Ashley, Jessica, and Hope. You guys did an amazing job today. And thanks again. Thanks for joining us from all over, everyone.
Thank you.
Miigwech and Wopida, thank you.
Masito. Hi, Miigwech. Walalan.
It's been fun.
Yay!
Gijawena Min and Miigwech for standing up for our silent standing nation. Miigwech.
Miigwech from Winnipeg.
Oh, Miigwech.
I never know what to do at the end of these. Tyra, are you going to shut her down?
I was just waiting for everybody to hop off because when I hop off, it'll close the meeting out for everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Recorded. Can we get a copy of it?
Yeah, it'll be posted on our social media and our email listserv.
Perfect. Thank you. Miigwech. Oh.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Hopping off for real
Jessica,
now.
Hope, Terry, Tyra, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, see you all tomorrow.
See ya.
Yeah.